in council chamber. Joining me here in council chambers are Councilor Grenier, Councilor Robertson, Councilor Wingard, and joining us on Zoom is Councilor Gardner, and Councilor Osher is going to be joining us shortly on Zoom. We also have some staff members here. Some of the faces we see regularly. One that we don't see regularly is Chris Prue. So welcome, Chris, who is our new superintendent of our water pollution control facility. Agenda review. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions? No changes. Approval of minutes of December 6th and December 13th. Could I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
And second? Seconded. Any corrections, additions, deletions? If not, we'll have a roll call on approval of the minutes.
Councilor Perry,
In favor?
Councilor Gardner,
In favor?
Councilor Robertson,
In favor.
Councilor Grenier,
In favor.
Councilor Wingard,
In favor.
and Councilor Osher.
In favor.
Vote is 6 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you very much. Public hearings. We have two public hearings tonight. Public hearing A, to consider a vitulous license for Global Montello Group Corporation doing business as Alltown, 103 Park Street, Orono. Patrick?
Hi, Patrick S.C., Code Enforcement Officer, and my approvals are based off of staff, police, fire, and town clerk. And all inspections have been completed by staff, and we're asking a conditional approval. We're just waiting on the payment for the license.
Any comments for or against the issuing of this license? Any comments from the public? None. Then we'll close public hearing A and move on to public hearing B to consider a vitulous license for DMCP LLC doing business as Dunkin' Donut, 103 Park Street, Orono.
And this is the same. Staff has completed all inspections and is recommending a conditional approval upon the payment for the license.
The motions indicate conditional approval on both of these. Good. Any comments for or against the issuing of this license? Either council or the public? Hearing none. We will move on to acknowledgement by council members. Thank you, Patrick.
Yes.
Councilor Grenier, any acknowledgements?
Not today.
No. Councilor Robertson.
To acknowledge the return of the light.
Yes, isn't that
Yay.
nice? Councilor Wingard.
None.
Councilor Gardner.
Yeah, just remember to bundle up tomorrow. It's going to be dangerously cold. And also, it looks like sort of at the 0 hour, we got some folks who turned in papers to be on the ballot for both council and school board. So please make sure that next month, folks, you tune in to the candidates night so that you can get to know everybody in case there are folks that you don't know already.
Candidates night is,
February 3rd at 6 p.m. It's full remote this year.
and absentee ballots are available. I believe it was February 7th.
It would have been February 7th or 8th if you.
That's okay. It was in the newsletter.
February 7th.
I would just join Councilor Gardner in acknowledging Orono residents who stepped up to run for public office. We greatly appreciate their interest and look forward to hearing from them on the 7th. Unfinished business? We have none, I don't believe. Consent agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Approval.
And a second? Second. Whichever.
Jeff, here's Jeff.
We ready for a vote on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Councilor Perry,
In favor?
Councilor Gardner,
In favor?
Osher,
In favor?
Council Robertson,
In favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor.
and Council Wingard.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Moving on to new business. Order 22-15, order approving an ordinance amendment to the Town of Orono ordinances, Chapter 18, Land Use, Section 18-153, Marijuana Establishment, Section 18-106, Schedule of Uses, and Section 18-31, Definition, to amend zoning and performance standards for marijuana establishments. Something we've talked a great deal about, and Kyle is here to summarize, I believe.
Yeah, so Kyle Drexler, town planner. We've had both planning board and town council public hearings on the ordinance amendment. Its primary purpose was to address the moratorium for marijuana retail stores in the C2 district on Park Street. So the amendment kind of addresses that issue, as well as a few other minor changes relating to smaller scale cultivation facilities in the FNA and the LDR areas that were overlooked when drafting the initial ordinance. So at this point, if there's no further questions, the amendment is ready for adoption, I believe.
So again, we have discussed this many times in workshop. It has been to the planning board for their input. We have held our public hearing on it. Are there any questions from council members on this? You ready to move forward and vote on this item?
Yes.
Great. So roll call vote, please.
First, we need a motion and a second.
Well, that's a nice idea.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. I'm glad Nancy's here, boy.
Council Perry,
In favor.
Council Gardner,
In favor?
sure,
In favor?
Robertson,
In favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor.
Council Wingard.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you. Order 22-16, order authorizing a cost of living increase of 3.2% for all regulated paid town staff effective January 2nd, 2022, and further authorizing the town manager to adjust the municipal operating departmental budgets to accommodate these wages, with $81,393 allocated from the existing overlay account, which is already in our budget. That was my editorial comment. Motion, please.
Move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on this item.
Sure. Last month, we actually talked twice. We talked at council committee meetings on the 3rd of December and the 20th of December. We were talking about the fact that Orono's wages in comparison to our neighbors are slipping considerably. And when we went through the process, I think we all reached the conclusion that pay scale adjustments are likely warranted, but we'd like to do individual departmental pay scale adjustments as part of our regular budget process. So staff is working on recommendations that will come back with regard to that in March, likely. When we talked, we knew that our cost of living adjustment for last year was 2%. For this year, it had already, the CPI had already gone to 6.4% in November and 6.8% in December. And kind of tried to find a balance between what the budget could reasonably withstand and fairness to the employees, and ended up with the idea of a mid-year cost adjustment of 3.2% across the board for everyone. I did a spreadsheet. I don't know. I think I may have left it out of your background material. Was it in the background? No, it was not. The wages that we had talked about before were right around $69,000. It came out to $68,736. Another $4,262 for FICA, $997 for Medicare, retirement increase because of those wage increases of $7,396 for a total cost of $81,393. I have that broken down by department that we would attach to the minutes to facilitate the budget adjustments.
Thank you, Sophie. Any questions or comments from council?
The only, I mean, I've spoken about at the last meeting about, why, why I'm glad that we are starting this conversation and making this first gesture as we move forward and evaluating the pay scale across the staff. I just want to also take a moment to recognize that staff have worked very hard under very, very difficult circumstances and conditions over the last couple of years. And it's not, unfortunately, it's not getting any easier day by day. So, I just wanted to recognize staff for that and that they are still doing the excellent job that they always do, even under some of the most difficult conditions they've probably experienced in their professional careers. So thank you.
I'm sure that's accurate, Megan. Thank you. I just add that we appreciated the information that was presented during our workshop. Zach Turner did an excellent job of informing us and comparing the salaries in Orono to our like communities in the area, and that made our decision a lot easier, I think. So if there are no other comments, let's have a roll call vote on this order, please.
Council Perry,
In favor?
Council Gardner,
In favor?
sure,
In favor?
Robertson,
In favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor?
and Council Wingard.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you. Moving on to order 22-17, order approving a one-time premium wage payment of $1,500 each, with $4,300 paid from town coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds, also known as America Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, and $4,500 from existing overlay account. Sophie, do you want to just briefly comment on this?
Move approval.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
So these premium wage payments are for first responders. I think I've left that out, but with the background, I think we're fine. These are for people with direct, in the police and fire department that have been directly working with individuals throughout the pandemic. The split here is that we have 3 individuals that come very close or are over the minimum amount allowed or the maximum amount allowed by ARPA. And just out of an abundance of caution, because I know we're going to be audited and I want to I took a very conservative approach to this. That leaves $4,500 that would need to be paid out of overlay to be consistent across the board. So the America Rescue Plan Act funds allow for these premium payments. When we particularly looked in our police and fire departments, we saw a very large discrepancy between what our people were paid and what the region was paid. And we really felt like this was an allowable use under the grant funds that would allow us to gross people up a little bit more as we moved into collective bargaining this year.
Questions or comments from council? Again, something that we've talked about at considerable length during workshops. No other questions? Let's vote on this item, please. Nancy.
Council Perry,
In favor?
Council Gardner,
In favor?
Council Osher,
In favor?
Robertson,
In favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor?
and Council Wingard.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you again. So council committee representative reports.
I have nothing.
Well,
Just a lot, so, yeah. Been really busy.
Councilor Robertson?
We didn't meet in December either.
There. Councilor Gardner?
I think the only committee that met since our last full meeting was yours, Tom.
And I just remind you, we had 3 items that we discussed at the last Finance and Operations Committee meeting. One was the non-union wage analysis. Another one was an update on regional climate action planning efforts. And the third was proposed meeting schedule for the first quarter of the year. So those are just 3 items that we discussed at that point in time. Future agenda items or items of concern?
Can I just bring up a change to the listing of meetings that I sent out?
Sure.
First is the Environment Committee. Nancy and I got our wires crossed, and the Environment Committee date was listed as the 3rd Wednesday, and it should have been the 4th Wednesday. So we're gonna resubmit that. And the other, we had Councilor Wingard pointed out that Passover was omitted from our list of important religious dates. So I'd like to add that, if that's okay with folks, and republish the list as in final form, and we'll post it on the website as well.
And send us.
Yep.
A new copy, please. Okay, anything else on future agenda items or items of concern? Public petitions? I don't believe we have any public petitions. Public comments? Do we have anybody out there, Belle, that wants to make a public comment?
Nobody has their hand raised at this time.
Right. So now we move into a workshop, and there are 3 items on our workshop, and the first item is presentation, community resilience program. And I assume that's going to be on Zoom?
It is going to be on Zoom, and I just need Belle to promote Megan and Rob.
They're coming.
I don't know if, Rob, would you like to set this up for Megan, or are we just going to hand the microphone to her?
Well, I think I'm ready just to hand the microphone to our newest member of the Public Works team, Megan Hess, who is our Environmental Services Coordinator, and she has already proven to be well worth the effort that we put in to bring her on. So I think she's well prepared and ready to go.
All right, is it all right if I share my screen now?
Please do.
So, can everybody see my screen on that end? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Hess, and I am, in fact, the Environmental Services Coordinator for the town of Orono. I'm really excited to be here. So thank you for giving me your attention for this presentation. I would like to share a State of Maine climate action grant opportunity that the town of Orono would like to participate in. So there's really 4 parts to my presentation. I would like to give a brief overview of climate change in general, and specifically climate change in Maine, just to get everybody on the same page. Next, I would briefly describe the State of Maine's climate action plan and the goals that it possesses, which will tie into the climate action grant. And that's available to municipalities and some of the project ideas that the town of Orono may have if they receive the funding. So first, let's just do a brief overview of climate change, get everybody on the same page, including any public participants that may call in or might be listening to this presentation later. The definition of climate change is a long-term change in average weather patterns. So this is a chart or a graph from NASA on their website. And on the bottom of this graph is years. So this goes back to 800,000 years ago. And this yellow line here is carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. So as you can notice, there's a natural cyclic pattern that happens. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up and then it comes back down. However, what happened here? So in the 1950s, this is showing the level in the 1950s and the current level here. So we can see that there's basically a double, there's double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And these changes in the observed Earth's climate since the early 20th century are primarily driven by human activities. So for example, this is burning, fossil fuel burning like coal and oil. which increases heat trapping greenhouse gases levels in the Earth's atmosphere. When you have more carbon dioxide, that means that raises the Earth's average surface temperature. So Earth gets warmer. So let's talk specifically now about climate change in Maine and what is happening. So records show that the Northeast is warming faster than any other region in the United States. Specifically in Maine, the average annual temperatures are increasing statewide. So this is a graph from the Maine Climate Future 2020 update, which is by Ivan Fernandez et al. At UMaine. And again, this is showing that there's roughly a 3-degree increase in temperature across Maine. Records also show that there has been, and maybe you've noticed yourself, hotter and longer summers and shorter, warmer winters in Maine. Higher temperatures are worsening many types of disasters, including storms, heat waves, floods, and droughts. Records show that there's been increased frequency of severe storms and large rain events that are followed by drought. So Penobscot County actually suffered significant damages resulting from the 2017 windstorm, which was designated a federally declared disaster by FEMA. Also, just a couple months ago in October 2020, the U.S. Department of Agriculture declared Penobscot County as a primary natural disaster area due to the damages and losses caused by the drought that began last summer in July 2020. So this is definitely happening right in our backyard. Why should we care about this? There's plenty of reasons why we should care about climate change and what its effects on in Maine. Shorter winters and extreme rains boost tick abundance. And there's actually a study done in 2018 that Lyme disease changes the way that people interact with the outdoors in Maine. So this is something that people think about often. Drought and extreme rain events affects farmers, of course, and the way that rain comes down and waters their crops. And warmer weather and droughts threatens native species in Maine. So, of course, this impacts the native and wild brook trout. Also, why should we care? Of course, to keep everybody safe and keep everybody's property safe. So, yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. So for this, Orono participates in the Penobscot County Hazard Mitigation Plan. And this is an effort to reduce the loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disasters. So I wanted to mention this because this will be talked about in the self-evaluations that I'll mention in a little bit, this Penobscot County Hazard Mitigation Plan. So I just wanted to get it on your radar. But this is a broad overview of the concerns in Orono. And those natural disasters would be floods, severe summer storms, severe winter storms, and wildfires. So if we move on to Maine's Climate Action Plan, the state of Maine, of course, saw all of this climate change and what was happening in these natural disasters and said we need to act on this. So they created this Climate Action Plan. So in June of 2019, Governor Mills created the Maine Climate Council that comprised of scientists, local and state officials, industry leaders, and local citizens. Their task was to develop a 4-year climate action plan, which is the plan called Maine Won't Wait, which is the document here. And if you want more information on that, you can go to the source right at the bottom here. And the climate action plan's goal was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And there was really 3 goals: was to have greenhouse gas emissions 45% below the 1990 levels by 2030, 80% below the 1990 levels by 2050, and reach a state of carbon neutrality by 2045. So really the overall goal of this climate action plan is to ensure Maine people, industries, and communities are resilient to impacts of climate change. To do this, the Climate Action Plan has created a list of 8 strategies that people should follow or try to incorporate to meet these goals. For example, I'm not going to go through all of them, just this one for an example. Strategy A is embrace the future of transportation in Maine. So there was an assessment done of Maine's impacts on climate, and it concluded that transportation was responsible for over half of Maine's annual greenhouse gas emissions. So naturally, one of the entire strategies was revolves around transportation and how we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from transportation alone. There's, like I said, too, there's 7 other strategies that it provides. I just wanted to give you an example of one. So that leads us to the grant opportunity. So because of these new goals that the state of Maine had to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, there's a grant opportunity that's available to help municipalities in the state reach the goals. And this is called the Community Resilience Partnership. And what they want to do is help reach the goals of Maine Won't Wait, or that document I was just talking about. This works to help Maine communities, 1, reduce carbon emissions, transition to clean energy, and prepare for effects of climate change. They also offer grant opportunities, so that's fantastic. So to meet these goals, they are offering a max reward funding of $50,000 per participant, or per applicant, per round, and there's 2 rounds per year. And they have it set up that you can either look at a list of community actions and pick. These are pre-approved projects that they've already said, yes, if you do this, you're going to have a better chance of getting that funding. Or you can propose your own project that's specific to your municipality, and you can present that to them as well. So there's really 3 things that the town has to do to be eligible to apply for these grants. And the first thing is to complete a pair of assessments. So that's what I mentioned briefly before. The community resilience self-evaluation was a worksheet to help the town organize their approach to increasing resilience to natural hazards and climate change impacts. So last Thursday, a working group of 6 town employees from many different departments sat down and we filled out this self-evaluation. And I believe Sophie had either emailed or printed off a copy of this to you. So you should feel free to look over that self-evaluation. And then we also have to look at a list of community actions. That was that pre-approved list that I just talked about in the last slide. We'll be going over the list of community actions and possible project ideas during our community workshop meeting, which is the environmental committee meeting that Sophie had mentioned also on Wednesday evening, January 26th at 5 p.m. So that would help check off our second checklist item, which is to hold a community workshop. So we invite members of the community to participate in this as well. And the third item that we need to do to be eligible to apply for the grant is to adopt a resolution of commitment to the Community Resilience Partnership. And I believe that Sophie will be taking care of this, so I will defer to her with any questions on that. And lastly, so after we complete all of those things and hopefully we can receive the grant funding, we have a few projects in mind. After doing the self-evaluations, we've found that we could do a few projects. These are just possible ideas that we came up with, nothing set in stone, but upgrading and maintaining the stormwater system and the water pollution control facility infrastructure. We could do some staff trainings that involves hazard mitigation. And ultimately, we would like to reduce the town's carbon footprint. So again, this gets back to the strategy A that I had talked about in Maine Won't Wait. Transportation is responsible for 45% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if the town of Orono can help work on this, perhaps it's purchasing or leasing electric vehicles for the town operations, or installing electric vehicle charging stations in public areas to promote others to have more fuel efficient cars, and perhaps also using local diesel biofuel for the town's fleet for the diesel vehicles. But again, we're going to be talking about this at the environmental committee meeting on January 26th at 5 p.m. So we encourage participation in that. I will end with some actions needed for from the town council. 1 would be for continued support for climate action planning. 2, to adopt a resolution of commitment to participate in the Community Resilience Partnership. And actions needed from the Town Council Environment Committee on the 26th. We'll do a review of self-evaluations, but also discuss potential projects then as well. And with that, thank you for your time, and I'll accept any questions.
You made a very informative presentation. Questions from council? Cheryl?
Oh, can I interrupt?
Oh, go ahead.
Megan, could you stop your screen share so we can see people?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you.
There we go.
What's that? Hi, Megan. Thank you for that. So I went through this morning and went through the self-evaluation, but I also went through the grant. So I have a question for either you or for Sophie. When we apply, right, we have to join, first we have to join the partnership. There's a link to join the partnership. Does the grant, is for alone or for the partnership? Is it for the regional partnership? It's for Orono, it's specifically for Orono, but we have to be part of a partnership to apply for the grant. To apply for the Community Resilience Partnership, Community Action Grant, one of the steps, and maybe Megan, you've researched it, I was confused.
So
One of the steps is to apply for, is to join the partnership.
So my understanding is the step to join the partnership is us taking those 3 steps and submitting for it, correct, Megan?
Yes, that is correct. We need to do those 3 things to be eligible to even apply for the grant. We need to join that partnership.
Which we are doing
Which
here.
we're doing, and I
Right.
hope to have you finalize on the 31st of January, because the council can't approve the resolution that we need to be able to click to join until after the Environment Committee does its work.
Okay.
But I wasn't comfortable going through that step without having a public conversation during a regularly scheduled council meeting. So Cheryl, we also are part of the regional climate action planning process. As a region, we may apply for funding.
Okay.
We may decide that the next round we ask all the community, like the request for qualifications has just gone out for the consulting work for all of the data analysis, collection and analysis. Once that comes in, we expect that will be a 2-tiered approach, that the region will get a certain level of service, and then people who want more would buy more service. So it might be that we look at trying to do some of that as an individual or as a group to fund some of the things that come out of that for that 2nd tier. My understanding is that we can only apply once per round, either individually or as part of another group, that we couldn't say Orono will do it and this is our joint application, that it's Orono's name can only be on one application, but it's $50,000 in September, in March and September, I believe.
Right. Okay, good. And is there a budget attached to this?
So you're not giving permission for us to make the specific application at this point.
Okay.
You're giving us, you're saying that the town is committed. You're saying that the town will do the things for the community resiliency program. And you are telling us to go ahead and use our environmental committee to help frame the general project list.
Right.
When we have specifics and we're ready to make that application in March, we will come back to you at that point for the order that you normally see, which is we'd like to apply for X grant at this amount, and here's the match, and in general, this is what it will be for.
Okay.
So yes and no.
And create a resolution, or the resolution is on now.
The resolution is something that I'm going to present to you on the 31st.
Okay.
provided that this gets through the Environment Committee. I have faith.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan.
Other questions from council members? Megan?
Megan, I'm sorry, what happens if, in the process of acquiring and spending this grant money, we experience a delay like we've had with so many other projects past year and a half?
I do believe there's a grace period of 2 years, but I can look into that and get back to you with specifics on it.
Thanks.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question. So thank you so much for that presentation, and the slides were wonderful. And it is concerning the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. And one of your goals was to reduce, that you stated goals for us was to reduce Orono's carbon footprint. You didn't actually have a specific, I guess, trying to change our transportation. I didn't see a timeline on changing the transportation, or how $50,000 when we own so many vehicles is really going to correlate to changing the transportation. So I'm interested in that. I know you can't, that's probably something that has to be put into a plan, and maybe some of the money is going to be used to fund that kind of work. Building energy efficiency is something that's always on my goal for our town. So I'd also love to see that, because as your slide showed, about 20% is housing. And so if we talk about Orono writ large, besides the buildings that are owned and managed by our town council, or by our town, there's so many buildings in Orono, and at least we're partnered already with the university, who's had this goal and has Dan Dixon working with them on sustainability. But I'm wondering if there's a way in which Orono could be a leader in coming up with ways that we might be helping citizens in the town address lowering their carbon footprint, and if that's any part of what you're proposing to do with the $50,000.
I think you bring up a lot of very great points, especially because strategy B in that Maine won't wait document is all about energy efficiencies of homes and buildings. So that would be probably the second biggest thing that the state of Maine is looking at. So absolutely, I think that's also a big goal that they have. I would definitely bring up those thoughts, and we can talk about that in the environmental meeting on the 26th, certainly.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, Megan, for the presentation. I think you can count on continued support from the council on this effort, and we look forward to the next steps. Okay, we ready to move on to our next topic? Then our next topic is going to be housing in Orono. We're discussing this at Councilor Osher's request, and I'm sure you have all seen a great deal of publicity in Maine and the nation on the great lack of affordable housing in our country and in our state. I'm sure you're also aware of the significant study that has been done in the state of Maine, with established by the legislature, the commission last year, and the recommendations that are now going to the legislature. So with that kind of an introduction, am I passing this to Sophie, or am I passing this to Lori?
So I think start. We met Councilor Osher, and Councilor Perry and I met on Thursday night, Thursday afternoon, and we talked about this idea of housing in Orono. I think the first thing that we wanted to get to with some of the information that you received with your background material is that the town has been working through the implementation of addressing some housing issues in the comp plan. There are some things that are on our horizon, like looking at the number of parking spaces that are necessary, which might make it easier to create additional housing units. We also have the interplay with what's happening at the state level, which is why I gave you the MMA articles, and also the draft report from the Legislative Housing Committee. So when we met with Counselor Osher, I think she had a lot of great ideas. I think she was gonna think a little bit more over the weekend and kind of talk about what she would see as next steps. So I guess that's me passing the baton
There,
to Counselor Osher.
Lori.
Okay, I thought you were passing it to Kyle because I saw him get up. So thank you very much. It was great to meet on Thursday. I started my comments then with how pleased I am that this is everyone in Orono who runs for office pretty much says that this is an issue of concern. And we have been working away at it. The staff has been working away at trying to come up with ways in which we could make it easier for new housing development. Because all over the state, we're basically about 20,000 units short for people who need affordable housing. And all of us who have tried to purchase a home in Orono know that Orono's housing prices are high compared to the local area, and then our taxes are high. So we all choose to be here, but that continues to put a pressure against it being affordable. So, so I've prepared some comments. So I want to thank Sophie for the things that she included for you guys to review, to be prepared for this meeting. One was the November 2021 Town and City magazine that had an article about housing specifically, and then it had a description of how to approach elder housing. And really what elder housing, the concept is really, again, an affordable housing issue for a specific group of our population. But one of the things that they pointed out is to be intentional. And by that, they meant that we should assess the housing stock and the residents. So they suggest so that they're talking about elders, but in any case, the idea would be to assess identify the number of homes where there's elderly residents who are wealthy enough to own their homes, but not poor enough to access services for the elderly, like rides to the doctor for doctor's appointments, because those are based on how much your net worth is. And so they can't afford that because they have a large home, but they cannot subdivide it. So if they could turn their homes into duplexes, they could have help on site, or could afford, because of the rent payments by the person living in the other part of the house, they could afford to pay for tasks like driving to doctor's appointments or things that they can no longer do for themselves. So I guess taking what was in that magazine's article that's for municipalities, I thought one possibility in futuring how we approach this, especially as it will be time soon to come up with a new comprehensive plan, is that we would make a map or at least describe where these homes are located, if not the actual home, the number in different areas of the town. Because from my experience on knocking on doors when I ran for office, that they're throughout Orono. There are people who live in their homes and help make up the fact that Maine, although we have so many owner occupants, have a very small family size within the homes. And that was in that report from the Legislature's Commission, that Maine has a very low, it's about for owner occupied, it's 2.4 residents, and for rentals, it's 2.1 residents per unit. When those are large houses that were originally designed to hold a large family, there's plenty of place to subdivide. The other thing that housing, how to approach the elderly housing, said to think differently, and we're already doing that. It suggests addressing zoning constraints that limit accessory dwelling units, and we've already done that with a trial area. And it then says, in quotes, be proactive about ADUs, particularly detached ones. We haven't focused on whether the ADUs would be attached or not attached. And I've just gone to a legislative housing meeting right before this that addressed the ADUs. So I'm going to come back to that at the end of my comments. So then Sophie also included the magazine, the Town and Country and City magazine from December, that talked about the future legislation. And there's three pieces of future legislation that we're to look at in the legislature. One is LD 1312, which is an act to remove barriers to accessory dwelling units and allow accessory dwelling units where single family houses are allowed. So that would say that what we did with our pilot project it wouldn't just be in a pilot project area. It would be that any single family home could then be made into an ADU. And the goal of that is good. The goal of that is that instead of having just a pilot project where there's a very small subset of people who may take advantage of that, to our knowledge, I didn't pull any to look for any permits, but probably no one's taken advantage of that since we made that possible. But the idea would be that where there's already housing, there's already all the services, there's already, sewer and water and electric, and that you could just increase the density of the population by having more units in each building. So the concept is good because we know that density is part of making a town walkable. And that means that more people have access to the existing infrastructure. And so I loved that idea and I was all for it. And what we found when one of the housing caucus members that supported this is that the MMA was not pleased because it removes the local control. Because here, proactive towns like Orono that had already been thinking about ADUs and came up with our own solution to try to test the waters for ADUs would be, if this passed, this would be overruled by this statewide. It doesn't matter what the town says. The state says if you have a single family unit, it can have an ADU. So I said I'd talk about later. So this thing I just went to was reviewing the ADUs, and there's several states that have done this. A statewide, thou shalt allow ADUs. And Hawaii did it in 1981. And Hawaii, like us, is a vacation state and has lots of issues around short-term rentals, lots of issues about people from away buying places there that they don't live in year-round. It impacts the schools. It impacts, it's so much like what we experience here. And so for 40 years, they've had this ADU law. And they have still a huge problem with housing, just as we do. So I was sad to learn, I was always sad to learn that MMA didn't like this, but I was also sad to learn that it's probably not going to fix the problems that we have. And it's going to irritate a lot of municipalities that really would prefer not to be told by the state how they're allowed to zone things. When I spoke with Sophie and Tom, my thoughts were that we need to reduce the parking minimums because that is a barrier. We should reduce lot size, which we did reduce from 25,000 square feet to 20,000 square feet. But our neighbor Bangor, they dropped it to 5,000 square feet. And that's in this report, in the Housing Commission report, excuse me, the committee for the legislature really looks at the benefits of a lower lot size so that you could have more units on one lot. And the last is that there is this committee. So let's see, so ADUs. Then there's another bill. The ADU bill is carried over from the first half of the session. So we know the bill number. If you want to look it up, it's LD 1312. Another bill that was carried over from last session is LD 1673, an act to create a comprehensive permit process for the construction of affordable housing. This bill establishes a comprehensive permit process to streamline building construction permitting system, promote the creation of additional affordable housing by public agencies, nonprofit organizations, and limited dividend organizations. I think we had a visit from Jason Bird, or I know that Sophie spoke with him. I guess I do recall it. I've talked with him about it. I thought he talked with us, but if not, he's definitely talked with Sophie. And he does housing at Penobscot Cap, and they haven't done any projects in Orono, but they are doing some in other towns in the greater Bangor area. So this might be something that impacts us. So the other bill doesn't have a number yet. These are the bills that'll come out of this commission report. And the ones that seem to affect us will affect us as a municipality is that they want to provide technical and financial assistance for communities seeking support in making zoning improvements. That's great. So it's always nice when they offer some money. Again, we mentioned that eliminate single family zoning restrictions, and they want to create a 3-year statewide incentive program for municipalities that the qualifying community must make a commitment to reviewing zoning and land use restrictions. Zoning and land use policies to promote housing opportunities, qualifying communities would receive a state financial reward for up to 3 years, so long as they remain in good standing. So giving you the background stuff, just to say that things are coming down the pike and we are already on the way to being able to use funds that are available because we've thought about this a lot. The other thing I talked about with Tom and Sophie is that I would love to see, and so I would say to you, I would love to see our town staff, and I know they're already incredibly strapped, but I'd love to see us encourage development. So Greg Payne, who used to work for Avesta Housing and Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, and has now just moved over this fall to work for the state of Maine and the governor's office to do housing. He is saying that one of the issues he sees statewide, and Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, this nonprofit that he ran, had 140 different member organizations throughout the state. When he started, it was just the Portland area organization, and 15 years later, it had 140. That included Penquist and Bangor Housing and Orono Housing, Bangor, sometimes Bangor Area Homeless Shelter and Hope House, but mostly it's places that build housing. And what he's found throughout the state is that in a town like ours, where we don't have a major builder developer that regularly works here because we're a little small, and maybe we have a little bit of the restrictions we have been found to be unfavorable enough that we don't have a going concern that's building housing, affordable or otherwise here. He found that there are people who would build housing in municipalities that don't have something going on now, but want housing there, but they don't know how to make the connection. So he's looking as his first project at the state is to make it kind of, he called it sort of dating, where, you know, he would have the list of the developers who would be interested, and he would also have the list of towns that mentioned they're interested in having housing. They have some parcels that they thought would be good places for housing. And certainly the way it pencils out, meaning to make it worthwhile, there's that having affordable housing is one way to get support the developers to get the funding to do the work. So then Sophie and Tom and I talked about the specific places that might be available in our town. And we have 15 acres in the Sailor neighborhood that we already would love the town to be able to have the plows go up one street and come down the other street. But right now we have 2 dead ends at the end of the streets there. So there's other reasons why we would want a little bit of development in that area. But we own those lots, or they're not lots right now. We own that land. The town owns other places that might be something that we could try to get some housing in, but they each have their own challenges. So I guess my proposal is that we try to make a goal of moving forward. And I'll come back to what I learned today in the ADU discussion from Hawaii. This senator from Hawaii that came to speak with us, he's the one who said that Hawaii's had it for 40 years, the ADUs, and they still have a huge problem with not having affordable housing. And that means kids who graduate from high school, they leave Hawaii because there's not enough housing for anyone who's just starting out, nor can they afford it. So we have that in Maine. People graduate from high school and leave our state. We had an influx of, we're 7th in the nation of people moving to Maine with COVID, but they were not necessarily people who are just starting out. They're people who could afford to buy be COVID refugees and come here and buy houses. And so, so that, what I heard today, this senator from Hawaii that spoke to our housing group, he was talking about the importance of actually focusing on building high density housing close to your downtowns of your municipalities, or in some cases, these Aloha housing that he's proposing in Hawaii right now. They're actually talking about building whole towns as they've done in other countries. But for Maine and for Orono, it seems that even if the ADU thing were to pass, there's no evidence that that's going to actually address our issue, and that the way to address a housing issue, as the people who built all those student housing areas did, is to put high density housing. But hopefully not like that. We would not require so much parking. So anyway, so my pitch to you is for us to be able to talk about the ways in which we are willing to see Maine's Orono's housing grow. So some of the options are for our town to help facilitate meetings. For example, we already have a pilot project where we zoned so that people could build ADUs in one neighborhood in our community. And perhaps we could have ask the staff to have a meeting where developers or carpenters or builders that live right here in Orono who have already worked in that neighborhood could talk about what kind of projects they've already done. Not so that they could get work, because all the people I know that live in Orono that build houses and build additions and build ADUs, they're booked for the next 2 years. So I'm not talking about this as a marketing ploy for the people who do the work. I'm talking about this as an educational opportunity for people who live in the district we already identified as our pilot district for the ADUs, so that we, maybe on the smaller scale, from Greg Payne was talking about writ large, making this kind of dating opportunity where developers would connect with municipalities. But in the small scale, what we can do with our small project is the town facilitate, as they already did a meeting for that community recently, maybe have another meeting in that community to talk about how people could benefit from this pilot projects that we made. So I'll stop there and open it up for people to ask questions or to give your thoughts on housing.
Comments from anybody? Jeff?
Laura, I'd really like to thank you for the amount of work that you thought that you put into it, and the conversations you've had with people. We've talked about affordable housing. My concern when we delegate the authority to zone for housing to the state level is that we lose the character of our communities. So, we just had a community meeting where we had over 30 people in attendance. We talked about how they were concerned about the subdivision of homes within their communities. So I think those are important concepts to balance, right? There's a community education piece, but there's also a state education piece. And I think both of those, I think that has to be a two-way conversation, essentially. But I think you're right. There are opportunities, and I can remember a conversation that Evan Reichert facilitated over 15 years ago about connecting streets in the Sailor neighborhood. That is definitely something that conversation should be restarted. Thanks.
Yeah. Other comments, questions? Kyle, anything that you'd like to add to this discussion?
Sure. I mean, I can just give some, I don't want to get too into any specifics really, but I think in general, I mean, I've looked at the Housing Commission report that came out and the recommendations. I think a lot of them are things we've either done on some level or already working towards. I think some of them are aimed at tackling a very specific goal and will require extra work and research to make sure there aren't other issues that compound as a result of those recommendations. I mean, I sat in with a working group that met with MMA reps to while those housing commission discussions were going on. And I mean, I know in general, everyone there supported the idea of creating additional housing opportunities. The concern, one of the biggest concerns is the impact on infrastructure in smaller communities, and you know, how does infrastructure hold up to adding in that increased demand of an increased supply of housing stock. So you know, I think something that I've talked to Sophie about wanting to do you know, in the near future is meeting with other town staff so we can sort of map out and visualize where Orono's best opportunities to grow in a sustainable way, where could more housing supply go in. As far as accessory dwelling units, I do think we need more education on things like that in the town, because we allow ADUs everywhere right now in every zoning district, wherever you have a single family home. If the lot is more than, I think, 8,000 square feet, you can have an accessory dwelling unit either attached to the home or detached. You know, there's some additional standards in there that kind of limits the scale to under 500 square feet, which if that's what's preventing people from taking part in doing them, then maybe that's something that should be revisited at some point in the future. But to my knowledge, that's not the conversation that we're having. We don't get calls all the time from people interested in doing ADUs, but they want 600 or 700 square feet, and you know, and that's what prevents them from doing it. So yeah, I do think it's a matter of either people themselves don't necessarily want to take that initiative of building one on their property, or maybe some people just don't know about it. So yeah, I do think there are a lot of things there that were touched on that we're working towards. The comp plan mentioned looking at the parking minimums. It's something that we'll probably get to and start a conversation on in the next few months. Comp plan basically says our required minimum parking, where it's flat out in every part of town, it's 3 spaces for every new dwelling unit. It's high compared to other communities. The reason it's like that is because of the number of, you know, rentals with unrelated people, and the fact that you know, the thought was generally that would bring the number of individual cars on a lot up, so more parking would be required. But there are a lot of ways that could be looked at and adjusted based on, you know, what part of town you're in. Are you closer to, you know, services and in a more walkable area? Do you have access to transit? You know, could, you know, newer dwelling units that are studios or 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms require less parking than 3, 4, 5 bedroom units? So yeah, I think, you know, we're starting to look at a lot of that stuff. And then obviously as the housing commission report progresses, we'll have a lot more to talk about.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I just want to, so, I mean, we know that there is an affordable housing crisis across the state and in this town. I mean, on the one hand, across the state, you talk about, you know, someone who works a minimum wage job cannot afford the average 2-bedroom apartment anywhere in the state, in any county in the whole state. Like, so there are a lot of factors in that. It's not just about the housing prices, but housing prices in relationship to wages. That's a huge crisis across the country and certainly in the state. We know that, you know, denser housing can be better for a lot of environmental impact issues. And then specifically in this town, we know that our largest employer, the University of Maine, the majority of people who work for the University of Maine do not live in the town of Orono, and the average staff salary is not high enough to be able to purchase the average home in this town. And that is all of that. All of that is, you know, the reason why this has been in the comp plan, why we've been working on this year after year to try to address these issues. The only thing that gives me pause about the state commission, and I do applaud the work that they did, they made a lot of excellent recommendations, but the one thing that I do find a little concerning is that I think that when things happen at the state level, they're really looking at the big picture. They're looking at equity issues. They're looking at economic issues. I feel like there's not always attention paid to the individual nature of certain communities, particularly communities that have either college student housing or tourist housing. So we saw an example of this with a bill that passed in the legislature last session, where there had to be some lobbying from MMA and some revisions made to that bill because the nature of that bill would have negatively impacted potentially towns specifically like ours with student population rentals, or towns like Bar Harbor that have a lot of vacation rentals or tourist rentals. So like the only thing that gives me pause about some of the state involvement in this issue is when there are these larger blanket concepts that may not always take into account these relatively few cities and towns across the state that have very specific housing markets. So, you know, I understand that's why MMA kind of goes to bat for local control. That's one of the reasons why they would do something like that. And so for me, that's always been the balance of, you know, yes, I would love to see, you know, much denser housing, but also is that we need to make sure that we're not creating a market where it's just for students and the prices are artificially high because they're trying to attract students who can pay a little bit more per bedroom or something. I mean, we've had these conversations before. So I don't have any sense that council or the town hasn't been fully committed to this issue the entire time I've been on council, and that we continue to do so going forward, making sure that we're making smart decisions for our specific housing needs in this town.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, important issues, Lori.
So the national conversations on housing affordability show that in New England, there's a index that was created by the University of Pennsylvania, and it found that the most stringent region in the country for zoning regulations is New England. So it has the most restrictive zoning for building housing. And Maine is the worst in New England. So across the country, they rated all the states. The Cato Institute, which is a conservative think tank, rated all the states, and Maine is 4th in the nation in restrictive land use regulations. And so their quote was, "The growing number of rules and regulations on land use has stemmed from well-intentioned efforts to promote public safety, environmental objectives, aesthetic goals for development. But the major side effect of this growing volume of rules has been to deter construction and reduce the supply of housing, including multifamily and low-income housing." So we are Maine, and we the legislature commission is because at the town level, even great projects like the LL Bean wanted housing because it's good for the economy that your workers can have housing. So LL Bean wanted to put housing in Freeport, and wanted to build single family homes and multi-housing units, and they were pressured against doing it from the people in their own town who didn't want the character of the town to change. So part of this is because at the individual level, our constituents are concerned about their quality of life and the open space, and their fears about increased density, not seeing that even though America's moved away from explicit forms of racism, embodied in Jim Crow laws, for example, there's more subtle forms of exclusion that are affecting our daily life. And those include having a town, as Megan just mentioned, where the people who work at the biggest employer in our town cannot afford to live here. And so I'm so glad that our town works on this regularly. What I wanted to do here was to talk about which things we would want to move forward on that we know are going to upset people. That's part of the job of being a leader, is to chart the course and put out a plan and open it up for people to give comments. So this idea that we could do some education, and so the excuse me for misspeaking, Kyle, and all of you, that this pilot plan is not for the ADUs itself, it's for being allowed to subdivide your property as long as you had a certain lot size that you could have another unit on your lot. And that hasn't, that I know that hasn't occurred. But also ADUs, many people don't even know what ADU stands for. It's accessory dwelling unit. And one way to move that forward, and I know from energy efficiency, I started doing energy efficiency in 2009, and people just said, just help me lower my fuel costs because I can't afford everything in my life when fuel costs almost $4 a gallon. And they weren't thinking about energy efficiency in the terms of global climate problem. They were just trying to lower their costs. So the ADUs are valuable in many ways besides increasing density and decreasing our carbon footprint as a town, because the data shows that when you increase the density in a town like ours, that you lower the carbon footprint because people walk more and they travel in their car less. And so carbon footprint's lower depending on the size of the town and how much gets built, between 17 and 27% lower carbon footprint because of over the whole community when you add more people and make the community more dense. I mean, New York boasts having the lowest carbon footprint per capita because people don't have cars there. People don't travel that far in their personal vehicles. That lowers carbon footprint quite a bit. Their house sizes are smaller too. So anyway, so I wanted us to do that hard work of being the people who put out a straw argument that other people will say, that upsets me. Because that's kind of part of being a leader, is to say, here's an idea. No one's going to like any of these ideas, but let's figure out which one is the least painful, because we can be leaders in addressing this problem, both in this incremental, which ADUs or making more units per lots is one way to do that. But I'm also looking at how the town could be more proactive. We don't have, for example, Old Town has a housing authority. We don't have a housing authority. We don't have, we don't have a group that's pushing housing or a committee. And that's one other possibility, is that the town would have a committee. Like now we have an environment committee and they're focusing on the environment. Or maybe it's a subset of the environment committee because more dense housing is good for the environment. So that's what I wanted a council meeting so we could talk about this and say, what would we be willing, what straw arguments would we be willing to throw out there for Orono specifically?
Well, again, thank you for presenting us this information and giving us a lot to think about, and staff something to think about. I'm sure we're going to come back and have further discussions on this and see where we can go for next steps. We all set?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks again, Laurie. Moving on to the next item on our workshop list is increasing annual pay for counselors. And I think this was brought to our attention by a council member, and this is not a discussion to decide whether we're going to do it. It's a discussion to decide if there's an appetite to further explore it.
Exactly.
You saw in the, saw in the background material that the stipend for council has not changed since 1980. So that's a fair amount of time. Sophie, you're going to speak, I'm sorry.
So I don't know if you want background before we start, or if what was in the background material was sufficient. I don't want to.
I think for the publics who might see this later, it'd be good to give a little background.
So the town charter was adopted in 1969, became effective in 1970. Section 1-1-2B speaks to the compensation of town councilors. Today, if you go online, what it says is that council can determine the annual salary of the chairperson and councilors by ordinance, but that no ordinance increasing the salary can become effective until the commencement of the terms of councilors elected at the next regular election. So we did it now, it would become effective starting in March if we could get it all done that quickly. And then it goes on to talk about how it's supposed to be paid on a quarterly basis based on the work it provided in the previous quarter, and that if you're not, if you're elected by a special election, it's pro rata for the quarter. And then it says annual salary shall be $1,200 for the council chairperson and $1,000 for counselors. So when Councilor Robertson brought this up, I immediately went to the charter and read it and said, ooh, there's conflicting language here, because at the beginning it says you can set it by ordinance, and then it says it shall be. So Nancy has a wonderful filing system, and we went through things, and we actually determined that the last time that the ordinance, the only time that this section of the charter has been changed was in 1980. And it was because in 1969, it established initially, it said initially, the pay shall be $800 for the chair and $600 for the counselors. And they lined that out and then just stuck at the bottom this new language about $1,200 and $1,000. So I reached out to Roger Huber because I needed to understand what we could or couldn't do. And he agrees the next time we open up a charter for an amendment, which we can't do with the one that's open right now, we've got to wait for a cycle. We should clean this up, this language, and make it clear that it is what it is. And but that based on his reading and looking back over time, the intent was clearly to establish a one-time place for council to then establish future salaries by ordinance. So we do have a formal legal opinion that tells me that you can address moving forward. Now, tonight, I know we're not going to discuss, I didn't provide a whole bunch of background information. I can just tell you back of the envelope, when you look at CPI, the change in the council salary would go from $1,000 to about $3,300 just in the change of the value of a dollar between 1980 and now. And the 200 differential turns into about $750. So that is what I have for you. The rationale I would leave for Councilor Robertson.
So let me take it down for just a second. So councils across the state are increasing their pay. And the amount of work that we do, I think all of us do outside, our jobs, our regular jobs. I wasn't thinking that we would bump us up to 3,500 a year, but I was thinking that it would be possible if council was interested. If council is not interested, then it's a moot point to possibly bump us up to maybe 2,000 a year, which would just double our rate. It still wouldn't match the CPI, but it would be a little bit extra. I think that the incentive for people to run, I think this was another kind of consideration that I was taking, or that I was thinking about, was that when we want people to run for council, it's not just a one night a week deal. I think in order to make meaningful change, we all put in a lot of extra time. And so, I don't know. I'm gonna leave it at that. I think we all know it's difficult for me to ask for more money. That's kind of a touchy subject, but I feel like across the board, I think it's time. I think it's timely. I think 40 years is long enough to go by without a raise. But I'm not saying that it needs to be exorbitant. I'm just saying that a little bit more would be nice incentive for people to run and for people to serve. And that's all I'm going to say.
Other comments?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, Cheryl. And I will admit that when I saw it on the agenda, my gut reaction was like, oh, no. Like that, like I look at this as almost like, this is like volunteer work, and we work on the budget every year, and we know how strapped everything is, and we know how few resources we have and so many demands. And like, increasing council pay seems like the last thing that we should be doing. I don't want to take more of the town's money personally. However, obviously that probably for the same reasons as you, Cheryl. Like, even though, yes, I am not a person of means by any stretch of the imagination, you know, I would feel weird about it. That was my gut reaction at first. But then, of course, when I think about it more, it's like, it is an equity issue. I mean, part of the reason why, you know, if you say, oh, well, service to the town as a politician is, you know, volunteer work. Well, that excludes a whole number of people who cannot afford to simply volunteer their time. And so at the end of the day, do you just continually end up with, you know, political bodies that are primarily, I mean, we see the same thing in the legislature. A huge swath of legislators over the decades have been relatively affluent, older white people, because those are the people who can put a huge chunk of time into being in the legislature for not very much compensation. And so when we look at elected bodies across the state and across the country, I mean, not some states have better programs than ours, but you know, if you're not compensating people to a level where they can afford to take time away from what they would be doing otherwise to earn money, then you're excluding people. And that means that you're not going to have everybody's voice at the table who should be there. And so, you know, although personally, I wouldn't want anyone in the town to look at this discussion and say, oh, counselors just want more money. But like, also, I don't want a single solitary person who wants to run for office in this town to say, well, I can't do it because right now counselors make sub minimum wage, basically. I mean, if you think about the hours that we spend doing this work, not just in meetings, but prepping for them, we probably make about $5 or $6 an hour. And so the bare minimum, I think, should be minimum wage in that ballpark, just so that it gives more of an opportunity for people who legitimately want to be in service to their community, but also their life situation means that they can't simply volunteer their time because they don't have that luxury. So I would be interested in looking more at this and talking more about it.
Other reaction. We've just gone through a process of looking at the wages of employees and comparing them to like communities. I would be interested in, if we're going to continue this discussion, of doing the same thing with council stipends. What are like communities in the state of Maine doing, and how do we compare to what they're doing?
So can I just get some information, because I do think that your word choice is resonating with me in terms of like communities in the state, the size of the population, the type of work, because I would argue that it's not necessarily within a labor market, because we're not really pricing an hourly rate. Like, if you go up to Piscataquis County, there are people who will make significantly more in smaller communities because they have no manager. They're doing a different type of work. Councils in smaller communities might not have the same type of inner expectations for out of meeting activity and stuff. So if I were going to look at this, I would look at our population size and kind of compare.
In council manager form of government.
Yep, if that works for you.
Unless there's an objection from council, I think a next step might be looking at a comparison of where we stand against other similar communities.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was on a council, it's about 10 years ago, I think it's been about 10 years ago up in Fort Fairfield, and if I remember correctly, we met one day a month, no committees. Our budget process took all of 3 days, and we got paid about $225 a quarter for just basically showing up. It wasn't nearly like this. So yeah, I think the conversation probably should happen just simply because of the amount of work. I bet you if we told the public exactly how it broke down in time consumption of an individual, they would look at like, oh, why, you know? I mean, we do it obviously for other reasons, but yeah, I think doing it the way you're recommending is a good way of looking at it.
Okay, so I think we have a next step.
The finance and operations is what I hear.
Yep.
But it has to be divisible by 4.
That's the only thing I asked. I said, whatever you guys decide works, just please to make it divisible by 4.
Well, I think it's great that you brought this up, Cheryl, and I think the number that Sophie gave us for what would be paid for council correlated to what, this is the assumption being that the last time that the salaries were set, that it was a reasonable amount to pay. I know that the state legislature, the last time the salaries were set was in 1988. So we're sort of in the same ballpark of that inflation alone has made it so that this is a sub minimum wage. So I think that it's a great idea. And the number that Sophie came up with actually sounded reasonable to me. I support Tom's idea of looking at other towns, but I also think that that across the state, we do not pay the people who serve our communities a reasonable wage for the time that they put in. And so just as Megan described, that people who are serving in the legislature, I think it's the same for people who are serving on the town council, that they're not representative of everyone in our towns or our state. They're representative of people who could do this job without being paid for it. And this is a very important job. And I think that the job should be paid for, and it should be paid at a wage that makes it something that anyone who lives in the town, even those people who are working for minimum wage or on some kind of, if we're working for minimum wage, or if they're students, that would be able to imagine that this would be a worthwhile endeavor for them and that they could afford to do this. Of course, it's worthwhile in terms of service, but I think I'm fully supportive. So you basically, Cheryl, if you brought this up and then has said, Sophie did the calculations, to then say we or the town council, since won't be on it, only needs 2,000 when Sophie came up with 3,500. I go with what Sophie came up with. I think it sounds like very important to pay the people who serve this town, and I'd like to see the number go up.
Thank you. Okay, so I think if
Just one question
Yep.
for you. I just pulled up my planning doc. And I gotta get a sense of the speed with which council wants to do this. So for example, if we came back on the 24th of January and we had information, draft ordinance language, we could look at noticing a public hearing for February 14th, which makes it very clear it's before the next election. I can also talk with Roger to make sure that an ordinance that's adopted, so if we went to March, it would be adopted after, so you have to wait a year. So I just need a sense of timing. Are you okay with moving this forward for a discussion in January, putting it out there for the world to hear about it in February and adopting it, or would you like to put this for next year? We can still do it, it just won't become effective.
I'm personally not in a rush. I want to make sure we take the time that's needed. That may be enough time, but
Yeah, I'd say like I'm not in a rush either. And I think that for me, the main driver would be, again, thinking about the people who are considering a run for office. And so that process is already kind of closed out for this next year. So I would, in terms of a timeline, I would definitely want this, I would want us to come to some sort of a conclusion before people have to consider taking out papers for the next election. But I don't see any super urgency for this year.
So why don't I put it just for discussion on the 24th, and when you're ready, we'll
To move
schedule
on.
it, understanding that it won't be in effect for this budget year. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. The last item on our workshop agenda is FEMA Saber grant opportunity, Safer grant opportunity. And that must be,
That chief is lurking in the background, but I'm gonna see how quickly I can walk us through this. The town of Orono has some staffing issues in the fire department. We've talked about it before. We've tried to manage them with a single floater that we couldn't get hired. When the budget for next year comes up, there will be a request from staff for additional staffing in the fire department. Simply because if every single time somebody needs to take a vacation or a holiday, we are paying overtime for that. We have a cycle of comp injuries that we can put data on. We are asking where we are burning out our people, and we are paying an extraordinary amount of money for those hours worked. So Jeff and I, who, Belle, can you elevate? Oh, he is. He's just didn't turn on his video. So Jeff and I are talking back and forth about what that number might be. We do not have agreement at this point, and I'm not going to have a debate in front of town council about the numbers. But I am interested to find out before we go through the process of creating a grant application, which we then would provide you with the justification for and the numbers for at the January 31st meeting. Just looking to see if council is going to have any appetite for that. So under the Safer grant, they will pay, so we create a budget based on our current pay scales. So there's a wage of a base, there's an hourly rate for a firefighter, health insurance, retirement, all of that. And that gets frozen at that point. And for the first, we can apply for a grant of up to 3 years. Most people do 3. The first 2 years, they will pay 75% of that cost. And the last year, they pay 35% of that cost. And then after the program is over, the council would make a decision about, does this make sense? Did it work the way we thought it would to reduce overtime expense and maintain better staffing? So it does not continue to be 75% each year. So people's rates go up if somebody wasn't a paramedic when they came, and well, how we calculate that rate can't change, and it's based on the amounts that were on the books when we applied. So it's a fixed amount. The numbers, we could apply from anywhere from 1 person to, I mean, theoretically, we could 25, 30 people. We're not, but you know. So I know it's a heavy lift for staff, and before I did that, if just out of hand, you don't have an interest, because what is bad is if we went through the whole process and you just said yes when we came back with the grant application, you can't really change your mind after that. It's very bad in terms of future funding through FEMA. But I would tell you that I am looking to add, I would like to add 3 or 4 people. And we are just 100 hours a week for a single person is just not a sustainable model, regardless of how much we're paying per hour.
my initial reaction is one of frustration. Frustration because we added an entirely additional crew with the expectation it was going to lighten the load on staff and provide a more employee-friendly scheduling environment. And we did that. We hired, what, 4 additional people?
Yes, 4.
4 additional people.
Yeah.
And now we're finding out that hiring 4 additional people hasn't improved. It might have made a more friendly scheduling environment, but we're still killing ourselves with overtime. Maybe more overtime than we had before because we have more people.
Well, I wouldn't say it's because we have more people. I think we've had more turnover. I think our COVID has caused major issue.
Yes.
We have experienced long-term medical issues, which if you look at the research, will tell us some of those issues we should expect to see continue. I am frustrated too, Tom. I'm frustrated because years ago when we went from 4 people on a shift to 5 people on a shift, that was supposed to solve it. And then the state came along with regulatory requirements that changed it. So we had to have 5 people on a shift. I think the place we find ourselves is when we staff to the shift and anybody is out, we're having to fill it with overtime. And so we want to be competitive. So we give people good benefits, good vacation time. We want people to take sick time, especially now because we don't want them to come in and get everybody else sick. I hear your frustration. I don't know how to solve it when we continue to staff at the line. I guess it's.
Can I ask, the grant doesn't require that the town maintain the staffing level at the end of the grant period.
No.
What happens then at the end of the grant period?
So we evaluate, and I think you can make a decision at the end of the grant period if things didn't work the way you wanted to. You could technically RIF people. If I'm not a big fan of that, but what you could do is let it go back down by attrition, which you would expect over time anyway. Or you keep it. And I mean, my goal in bringing it in is when Jeff and I run the numbers, we think if we had more flexibility, we would see a reduction in overtime. The place that we're having a discussion right now is what the reasonable number of people to bring on to do that. And we've got to crunch numbers, and crunching numbers is going to take a long time because in the fire department, you've got to lay it out on, you can't just make percentages or averages. You've got to lay it out on a calendar and see what our average absentee is, what it looks like, and how you can fill it. Because one person can only fill, there are requirements around no more than 48 hours, what shifts they'd be on, just that whole piece. So I don't know what the answer is at the end of the day. I know that we have not solved the problem right now. And 5 people on a shift next year, babies are going to be born under federal law. We have to give people time off for that, and people are going to get sick.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Babies are going to be born. People are going to get injured. People are going to get sick, and people are going to want to take vacation time. And I wish that we had been able to get the floater on. We just now got up to full staff. We have somebody who is retiring at the end of this month, and that position we've filled it, but we don't have a floater now. So we're not able to look at you and say, this is how much we saved with that floater, because we couldn't get anybody on. We just brought 3 new people in today to start, which brings us back up to full swing.
I would just hate for people to think, or for 3 years to go by, which I'm sure by that time, it would be worked into the budget, that people would lose their jobs.
So I'm not a fan of that. And
Right.
I wouldn't, it used to be with the Safer Grant, you would get 2 years for free, 1 year at 50%, and then you had to hold them on for 2 years after. They've cut the award, but they've cut that requirement. I mean, if this was just, we'll try it because there is money and we have no interest in keeping people, then we shouldn't. But for me, given our reasonable rate of attrition right now, I don't know that we need to. I think that there will be positions that need to be filled, that if it wasn't working the way council wanted it to work, we could just not fill.
So oh, sorry, Jeff. I never know when to jump in when I'm on the Zoom. Do you want to go ahead? Okay. So I'm in favor of applying for the grant. When it comes to our fire department, I feel that the primary objectives there are the safety and well-being of our residents and the safety and well-being of our firefighters. So we've been trying to figure out a way to prioritize both of those things in the most, fiscally responsible way for our town's budget. And what we've been trying, though admirable, the efforts have not been working. And at a certain point, we cannot risk the safety and well-being of either our residents or our firefighters. So this grant would give us an opportunity to see whether, the increased staffing, whether that would have the effect that we would hope for, or whether that isn't the solution. But if we were to find out that that wasn't the solution, we would be able to regroup. And I think it gives us an opportunity to do something that we are trying to do and to see if it works, and to do it with the assistance of federal money, which I don't see a downside in that. And like Cheryl, I too would not be, I would not want anyone to think like, oh, well, after 3 years, they're going to fire people. That would not be my approach at all. But I think that we've tried a lot. I feel like we've tried what we can do with the resources that we have, and we're stretching thinner and thinner. So if we do need a higher level of staffing, or we do need to approach this in a different way, this gives us an opportunity to try that out, and not only just to try it out to see for staff's purposes or for council's purposes, but also to demonstrate to the public what a difference these changes could make. Because if we do end up keeping a higher level of staffing and paying for a higher level of staffing, we really need to show our taxpayers like, hey, this is something we need to invest in. And so, we have data to show that this has made a positive impact on the whole system. So I'm in favor of applying for it.
Other comments?
I've got a quick question. I'm assuming in the work that Chief Lowe and you've done, Sophie, you've looked not only at comparable population size, but comparable call volume to make the proper staffing. So, and it's true that based upon the call volume estimate, we thought for a long time that a floater would help resolve the problem, but we haven't had an opportunity to try the floater yet. So why don't we just apply for one position to try the floater? Why are we jumping into 4 positions to start a new shift?
I'm not sure that we are.
Okay.
And I preface this by saying we have not nailed that piece down yet. I will just, I agree. I think the numbers would tell me that we might, well, I think one floater helped when we went from, we did 4. Then we did 4 on a ship with 1 floater and found a remarkable savings. And then we added the next ship where we took the floater away, and the bottom of the universe kind of fell out. And now we are at a point where we have 5 people on and we don't drop below 5. The other thing I would just say is, I don't know if it's called volume as much, Jeff, as the complexity of the call and the requirements when we go out of the barn. What is required on a call right now is very different than what was required on a call even 10 years ago, when I first got here. But yeah, I mean, I realize, I hope everybody understands that I totally realize that we don't have money. And our conversation that we're gonna have next is gonna reinforce that, right? And for me though, I think whether it's one or two or however many, Jeff and I would need to come in and make the financial argument to you. I guess my point is, if what you're saying, you guys have an idea of where we're gonna end up in the ballpark with pay increases, we've talked about that across the board. And if adding a body that we would pay 25% for in today's budget, which will be more next year, which will be more the years after that, is not something that you can support, I would want to not get people's hopes up next door and not go through that exercise. But I would expect when we come back, if you're open to a discussion, if we come back, we better be able to justify the number that we're going to.
I began by saying how frustrated I find this. I am open to discussion, but boy, I'm personally going to have to be convinced.
I'm used to convincing you, Tom. We're trying to at least. Jeff, did I miss anything?
No, I think you hit it all on the head. There's some complexity with this grant that goes beyond just saying we want to reduce overtime. There's other benchmarks we need to meet. So this is, I think, you probably already hit this. I think this is just getting the flavor of the council to say if we want to move forward with this, and then we can lay out what the parameters are and the requirements are and whatnot as we go forward. But
Our goal would be, so this is due by the 4th of February. We would be looking to bring this back at a special council meeting on the 31st of January, ready for you to look at. That
Okay.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm on some level kind of there too, but I would also want to also have additional pieces of information in the sense of, like, when we speak of public safety, for example, I typically hear a lot of issues with staffing on the fire side, not so much on the police side. And why is that?
Yep.
Is it a wellness program thing? Is it just the way it's working out? Is it all those things? Also, given that if we choose this route, and as people spoke saying, don't want to have somebody there and then all of a sudden they're gone, I would want to know right up front through, as we say yes with this grant, that addressing immediately what it's going to look like given 2 years from now, with just the thought that that person's going to be good, or two, or whatever, to say how we're going to deal with this, just kind of work on it. And that would be the things I'd like.
Good point.
So, and I will just say, because I can answer your first question very easily. Both police and fire deal with that same attrition creates an issue. The difference between them is with the police department, we are able to shrink our patrol level. So it's a level of service that we have control over. And so we don't see that correlation of a full shift, 24-hour shift of overtime that we have to fill, which is where the difference is.
Okay, we ready to move on?
I think so.
All right. We are going to have an executive session. And I would like a motion to move into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 405-6D for discussions related to negotiations of collective bargaining agreements with IAFF Local 3106 and Maine Association of Police Orono unit. And the first unit identified is obviously the fire department. And second. Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please, Nancy.
Council Perry,
In favor.
Council Gardner,
In favor?
Council Osher,
In favor?
Robinson,
In favor.
Council Green,
In favor.
Council Wingard.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor and then none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy.
So.
So do we need to do some technological
We
stuff?
need some we need to take a quick break.
Good.
Belle is going to end this meeting because there's no public conversation after. And the Counselor Gardner, Counselor Osher, and Jeff should all have links for the executive session meeting that we are gonna hold. All right, so I'm gonna get out of this and Belle's gonna do her magic.